I never used to care much for coffee. It was just something I drank in the mornings, black and bitter, more habit than pleasure. It woke me up, got me through the day, and that was enough. My wife, though, coffee was her thing. She didn't just drink it, she experienced it. She had her favorites, mocha lattes in winter, iced caramel macchiatos in summer, some foreign-sounding brew when she felt adventurous. I'd tease her about it sometimes, call her high maintenance over her obsession with frothy milk and imported beans. She'd just laugh and say, "You don't know what you're missing." Maybe she was right. Maybe I really didn't know what I was missing. Looking back, the signs were there. The little things. She started bringing home cups from a new place across town, ones with fancy logos I didn't recognize. She'd hum to herself while stirring sugar into her drink, smiling like she had some little secret. She started leaving earlier in the mornings, telling me she wanted to grab a cup before work. And at night, when she kissed me goodbye before heading upstairs, her breath always had the scent of vanilla and espresso lingering on it, stronger than it used to be. At first, I thought nothing of it. People get their routines. She had hers, and I had mine. Then came the evenings where she'd come home later than usual. Nothing dramatic, just 20 or 30 minutes here and there. "Oh, I got caught up at work," she'd say. Or, "Traffic was terrible." She always had a reason, and I, like a fool, always accepted it. But then one evening, fate, or maybe just bad timing, steered me straight into the truth. I had left work early, something I almost never did. Figured I'd surprise her, maybe swing by this coffee shop she kept raving about, and bring home a cup for both of us. Maybe even see what all the fuss was about. So I drove across town, pulled up outside the place, and parked. The shop had big glass windows, the kind meant to invite people in. Warm lighting, wooden tables, shelves lined with bags of fancy coffee beans. It looked nice, I'll admit. But all of that faded into the background when I saw her. She was standing at the counter, dressed in that light blue blouse I loved, the one that made her eyes stand out. She was laughing, tossing her hair in that way she always did when she wanted to be noticed. And she was noticed. By him. A man stood across from her, leaning in just a little too close, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was older than me, but not by much. Broad shoulders, tan skin, a trimmed beard that probably took more effort than he'd admit. And most importantly, he wasn't wearing an apron. He wasn't just some barista behind the counter. No, this man owned the place. I watched as she pulled something from her purse. Not cash. A credit card, maybe, or a gift card. I couldn't tell from where I stood. But that's when it happened. She didn't hand him money. She paid with something else. A kiss. Not a friendly little peck, not some absent-minded brush of lips. This was slow, intentional. A kiss that spoke of routine, of something practiced. Something familiar. Something they had done before. For a second, I couldn't move. My brain refused to accept what my eyes had just seen. It had to be a mistake. Maybe I misread it. Maybe. No. The way she smiled afterward, the way he whispered something in her ear, the way her fingers lingered on his wrist just a second longer than they should have. This wasn't new. This wasn't accidental. This was comfort. A feeling I should have been the only one to know. Something hot and ugly rose up in my chest, tightening my throat, clenching my jaw. My hands curled in a fist so hard that my nails dug into my palms. I wasn't the kind of man who made scenes. I wasn't about to charge in there, scream at her in front of a crowd, make a fool of myself. No, I didn't need to do that. Because in that moment, one thing became perfectly clear to me. My wife had been paying for her coffee in ways I never could have imagined. And I was going to make her regret it. I drove home in a haze, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streetlights blurred past, but I barely noticed them. My mind was stuck on that moment. The way her lips brushed against his, the way she smiled afterward like it was nothing, just another routine part of her day. A kiss. A casual, comfortable, familiar kiss. I didn't need to be a detective to know what that meant. That wasn't a first-time mistake. That wasn't a caught-up-in-the-moment lapse in judgment. That was practiced. That was habitual. And that meant I had been a fool for a long time. The thought burned like acid in my gut. I had been sitting at home, trusting her, believing her stories about working late, about traffic, about life. And the whole time, she had been stopping by that little coffee shop, letting some smug bastard touch her, hold her, kiss her. And who knew what else? I pulled into the driveway, shutting off the engine but not getting out right away. I sat there, staring at the house we had built together, the neatly trimmed lawn, the porch light she always left on for me. It all looked so damn normal, as if inside those walls wasn't a woman who had just kissed another man, who had been lying straight to my face. I should have stormed inside right then, demanded answers, demanded the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. Because fury like this, it needed control. It needed patience. And I wasn't about to go in half-cocked and give her the chance to weasel her way out of this with some pathetic excuse. No, I wanted her trapped. I wanted to watch her squirm when she realized I knew. So instead, I sat there in the silence, breathing through the rage, letting it settle into something colder, more deliberate. When I finally stepped inside, the house was quiet. She wasn't home yet. Of course she wasn't. I checked the time. She should have been here by now. I clenched my jaw, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through her text from earlier. Hey, babe. Long day today. Gonna grab some coffee before heading home. Love you. Coffee. I let out a slow breath, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could call her, ask where she was. But what was the point? I already knew the answer. She was still there, lingering in that coffee shop, probably giggling over some inside joke with him, sipping whatever fancy drink he made just for her. I tossed my phone onto the counter, the impact harder than I intended. A sick feeling settled in my chest. I needed to be sure. Seeing it once wasn't enough. I needed to catch her in it. No excuses. No, it's not what it looks like. Just the cold, undeniable truth. So I waited. I sat in the dim living room, the TV off, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second felt like a slap to the face. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, my hands were clenched so tightly that my fingernails had left crescent-shaped marks in my palms. The door unlocked, and then her voice. Honey, you home? It was light, cheerful, the voice of a woman with nothing to hide. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, and then she appeared in the doorway, her purse slung over one shoulder, a to-go coffee cup in hand. Hey, she said with a warm smile. You're home early. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her blouse was slightly wrinkled. Her lipstick was still intact, but not in the way it normally was after a long day. Her hair had that slightly tousled look like someone had touched it. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to speak, my voice calm, controlled. Yeah, I said. Got off early. Thought I'd surprise you. She beamed, walking over to kiss my cheek. The smell of coffee and vanilla lingered on her. I wanted to wipe it off. You should have told me, she said. I would have grabbed you something. I glanced at the cup in her hand. A tall, fancy-looking thing with whipped cream and caramel drizzled over the top. From a shop. I stared at it for a long moment, then back at her. She took a sip, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not tonight. No, tonight I was going to watch. Because if she thought she could lie to me this easily, if she thought I wouldn't see, then she had no idea just how much I was willing to uncover. And when I did, when I finally exposed every disgusting little secret she had been keeping, there would be no coming back from it. The next morning, I woke up before she did. I lay there in the quiet darkness, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had barely slept, my thoughts looping over and over. Her laugh, the way she leaned in, the way she kissed him like it was second nature. She shifted beside me, still asleep, her breathing soft and even. I turned my head to look at her. She looked normal, peaceful, like the woman I had married. But I knew better now. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. I needed time to think, time to plan. I walked downstairs and went straight to the kitchen, brewing myself a cup of coffee. Black, bitter, the way I always had it, the way she never did. I took a sip and stared at the coffee maker, at the neatly arranged bags of expensive blends she kept on the counter. When had she even started drinking all this high-end stuff? She used to be fine with the cheap grocery store brands, but now she had preferences, tastes that she had apparently developed elsewhere. I felt my jaw tighten. She came downstairs not long after, wrapped in her silk robe, stretching with a soft yawn. She looked at me and smiled. You're up early. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She walked over to the counter, reaching for her favorite mug. Did you already make coffee? I nodded, watching her as she hesitated for a second before grabbing one of her overpriced blends. She didn't like the way I drank mine. Too plain, too bitter. She started the process, measuring out the grounds, setting up the French press like it was some sacred ritual. So, she said casually, what's the plan for today? I shrugged, taking another sip. Haven't decided yet. What about you? Oh, work. The usual. The usual. I wondered if that included another stop at his coffee shop, another kiss at the counter, another moment where she traded loyalty for whatever little thrill he was giving her. I stared at her, but she didn't even notice. She was too busy humming to herself, waiting for her coffee to brew. Lying came easy to her. Too easy, and I wasn't going to let her keep getting away with it. I followed her, not in some dramatic spy movie way. No trench coat, no hiding behind corners. I didn't need to. She was too comfortable, too sure that she had me fooled. I waited until she left for work, let her get a head start, then I got in my car and tailed her at a safe distance. She drove like nothing was wrong, humming along to the music, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel. And then, just like I knew she would, she turned left toward his coffee shop. I felt my pulse quicken. She parked in the same spot, stepped out of the car, and walked inside like she had done 100 times before. I pulled over across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched through the large windows. She went straight to the counter. He was already there, smiling, waiting for her, like he knew she was coming, like she wasn't just another customer. She was expected. They talked. She laughed. He leaned in, and then, as if to prove just how little shame she had, she touched his hand. It wasn't much. Just a small movement, a brush of her fingers against his wrist as he passed her the cup. But it was intimate. That was the kind of touch you didn't share with just anyone, the kind that spoke of something deeper, something established. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I could have stormed him right then, could have slammed my hands on the counter, told them both exactly what I thought. But I didn't, because I wanted more. I want to see how far this went, how deep the betrayal ran, and most of all, I want to catch her in a lie. So I waited, and I followed her again the next day, and the next, and every damn time she went to him. For days later, I was done waiting. That morning, she was in the kitchen again, making her fancy coffee like always. I sat at the table, watching her, my fingers drumming lightly against the wood. She turned and caught my gaze. What? She asked, smiling, like she didn't have a single care in the world. I tilted my head. Nothing. Just wondering something. She took a sip from her mug. What's that? I leaned back in my chair. Why do you keep going to that coffee shop across town? It was subtle, just a flicker in her expression, a slight tightening of her grip on the cup. But I saw it. She blinked, forcing a little laugh. What do you mean? I shrugged. I've just noticed you go there a lot. Almost every day. Oh. She smiled, relaxed again. Well, you know how much I love their coffee. And they have the best beans. It's just a little treat for myself. Just a treat. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it, because I knew something she didn't. I had already been inside that coffee shop myself. I had already spoken to one of the baristas, and I had already asked a simple question. Does my wife pay with cash or card? The answer? She paid with a card. Every time. So why, on the night I first caught her, did she pretend to pay at the counter, only to kiss him instead? She didn't realize it yet, but her excuses were already falling apart. And soon, she was going to choke on them. I spent the next 2 days watching, waiting, letting her dig the hole deeper. It wasn't enough to know. I needed to see just how far she was willing to go, just how much of a lie our marriage had become. She was careful, or at least, she thought she was. She kept the routine the same, leaving early, humming some tune as she grabbed her keys, making a point to kiss me before walking out the door. A wife who had nothing to hide. But I knew better, and the more I watched, the more I realized something. She wasn't just cheating. She was comfortable in it. This wasn't some careless mistake, some affair that weighed on her conscience. No, this was easy for her. Normal. A part of her day, like answering emails or going grocery shopping. And that meant, at some point, she had made a choice. A decision that I wasn't enough. That our marriage, our vows, everything we had built together, meant less to her than whatever the hell she was getting from him. That was what I couldn't stomach. Not the cheating itself. I had already seen it, already accepted it. It was the casualness of it. The way she smiled when she pulled up to that coffee shop. The way she tossed her hair when she talked to him. The way she made excuses to me, all while knowing exactly where she was going and who she was going to see. She was playing me for a fool. And that was a mistake. The final piece came on a Thursday. I followed her like I always did. Parked across the street like I always did. Watch her walking like I always did. But this time, something was different. This time, she didn't go straight to the counter. She went around back. I leaned forward in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. What the hell was she doing? The back entrance was employees only. Not for customers. Not even for regulars. Yet there she was, slipping around the corner, disappearing from sight like she belonged there. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Was she going inside? Meeting him in some back room? Was she? I forced myself to breathe. I needed to be smart. I needed to see. So I got out of the car. I moved quickly, crossing the street, staying close to the buildings as I made my way toward the alley behind the shop. My pulse pounded in my ears, the sound of my own footsteps nearly deafening. And then, as I reached the corner, I heard voices. Hers and his. I stopped, pressing my back against the brick wall, my fists clenched at my sides. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be listening. But I couldn't move. You know, I can't stay long, she was saying, her voice soft. I told him I had a meeting. A meeting. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Then his voice, smooth, confident, amused. You say that every time. A soft laugh. Her laugh. The one she used to give me. Well, I can't exactly tell him the truth, can I? No. No, she couldn't. Because then she'd have to admit that she was a liar. A cheater. That every morning kiss, every shared meal, every night spent lying beside me was nothing more than a carefully crafted performance. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat, forcing myself to stay still. I needed to hear it. I needed her to say it. You ever going to tell him? He asked, and there was something almost playful in his voice, like this was all a game to him. I waited. Waited for her to say no. Waited for her to say of course not. Are you crazy? But she didn't. She hesitated. That was enough. I didn't need to hear any more. I turned and walked away, my entire body rigid with fury. Not the kind that burns hot and fast. Not the kind that makes you want to throw things and scream. No, this was colder. Sharper. A deep, sinking fury that settled into my bones. She was hesitating. That meant she had thought about it. About leaving me. About choosing him. And for that alone, she was already dead to me. I went home. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. Not exactly. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be the fool in this story. I wasn't going to sit here, waiting for her to make a choice. Waiting for her to decide if I was still worthy of being her husband. No, I was going to make the choice for her. I was going to make sure she had no doubt, no questions, no options left. By the time I was done, she wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything. That night, I sat across from her at the dinner table, watching. She twirled her fork through a plate of pasta, taking slow bites, casual, like it was any other night. Like she wasn't sneaking behind my back. Like she hadn't spent part of her day pressed up against him behind that coffee shop. She was good at this. Too good. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have known. But I had seen, and that made all the difference. I took a sip of water, my fingers wrapped tightly around the glass. My wedding band caught the light, a symbol of something that was supposed to mean trust, commitment, honor. I looked at her hand. No ring. She had taken it off before dinner, like she sometimes did when she got home, claiming it felt tight after a long day. But now I wondered, did she take it off before meeting him? Did she tuck it away in her purse before walking into that coffee shop? Did she sit at his counter, sipping lattes and flashing bare fingers so the world could see exactly who she wasn't married to? I clenched my jaw. She glanced up, catching my stare. You okay? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. A lie. But I was allowed those now, wasn't I? She nodded, twirling another forkful of pasta. Long day. Another test. If I said yes, She'd nod sympathetically, maybe rub my hand. If I said no, she'd ask why I was acting weird. I guess, I said. Neutral. Just enough to keep her from looking too closely. She smiled, sipping her wine. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last normal meal we'd ever share. The next morning, I set the trap. She woke up in a rush, running late again. I swear, I set my alarm, she muttered, yanking a sweater over her head. I don't know what's wrong with me lately. I knew. She had been getting too comfortable with her double life. Sleeping too well after a day of sneaking, of pretending, of lying. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her grab her purse and keys. You're still going to that coffee place today? I asked like it was nothing. She paused, her fingers hovering over her purse strap. Just for a second. Then she smiled. Maybe. Liar. She was definitely going. And this time, I'd be waiting for her. I got there first. I park in a back lot, the one I knew she used. Not in my car. She'd recognize it. I borrowed my brother's old truck, the one he never used, the one with tinted windows and an engine quiet enough not to be noticed. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. She pulled in 5 minutes later, stepping out of her car with the kind of casual confidence that made my stomach twist. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't looking around, checking for anyone who might see her. She had no fear. Why would she? She had been doing this for who knows how long, and I had never suspected a thing. She walked inside, her heels clicking lightly against the pavement. And just like before, she didn't go to the front counter. She went around back. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I had options. I could march in there right now, grab her by the wrist, throw her betrayal in her face. I could go up to him, the smug bastard who thought he could take something that wasn't his and knock that stupid grin right off his face. But no, that was too easy, too quick. I wanted something better, something she wouldn't see coming. So I got out of the truck, walking toward the alleyway, quiet and careful. I positioned myself just around the corner, hidden from sight, but close enough to hear. And then I listened. I missed you this morning. His voice came first, low and smooth. A laugh. Her laugh. I told you I was running late. Didn't even have time for coffee. Well, we can fix that. There was movement, shuffling, then a sound I knew, the sound of lips meeting. I closed my eyes, my fingers curling into fists. I had known. Of course I had. I had seen it. But hearing it? That was different. That was real. She had kissed me this morning, right before she left. And now, just an hour later, she was doing the same thing to him. It made my stomach churn. Then I heard her sigh, her voice dropping into something softer. We can't keep this up forever, you know. He chuckled. Why not? Seems to be working just fine. She hesitated. It's getting harder to lie to him. I felt something snap inside me. Harder to lie? Not impossible. Not wrong. Just harder. Like the only reason she hadn't left me yet was because the effort of keeping up appearances was getting exhausting. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle. I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. I turned and walked away, my mind cold, my decision made. She thought lying to me was hard. She hadn't seen hard yet. That night, I was waiting. She came home at her usual time, dropping her keys on the counter, kicking off her shoes. I sat in the living room, watching. Hey, she said, smiling like nothing was wrong. How was your day? I smiled back. Good. I was getting good at lying, too. She walked over, standing behind the couch, running her fingers through my hair. She did that sometimes, little gestures of affection, habits from years of marriage. I wondered if she did the same to him. I wondered if he knew I existed, if he even cared. You hungry? She asked, moving toward the kitchen. I was thinking of making something simple tonight. Actually, I said, stretching slightly, I thought we could go out. She blinked, surprised. Out? On a weeknight? Why not? I said, keeping my voice easy, casual. Figure we could try something new. Maybe that little place across town. What's it called again? Her face barely changed, but I saw it. The split second of hesitation. The way her breath caught, just slightly. She knew exactly what I was talking about. And now, she knew that I did too. She recovered fast, letting out a soft chuckle. Oh, I don't know. I've been there enough already, haven't I? I tilted my head, my smile widening. Yeah, I said. I'd say you have. Silence stretched between us. And for the first time since this all started, She looked nervous. Silence sat thick between us, stretching out like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. She wasn't smiling anymore. I watched as she swallowed, setting down her purse with deliberate care. Her fingers lingered on the strap, like she needed something to hold on to, something to steady herself. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't in control. And she knew it. She forced a chuckle. "What's with the weird questions?" she asked, her voice light, too light. "You never cared about coffee before." I shrugged, leaning back against the couch, stretching my arms over the top. My body was relaxed, but my mind? My mind was a coiled spring, ready to snap. "I guess I just got curious," I said, keeping my tone easy. "I mean, you love that place so much. You go there all the time." She shifted on her feet. "It's just coffee." No, it wasn't. But I let the lies sit there between us. Let her think it had landed, that I hadn't seen the flicker of panic in her eyes. She thought she could still control the conversation. Thought she could smooth this over like she had so many times before. I wanted to see her try. "Then let's go," I said, standing up. She blinked. "What?" I smiled. "Let's go. Right now." I watched the war play out on her face. The calculations, the panic, the desperate attempt to keep herself from crumbling. She was trying to find a way out. I was going to make sure she didn't get one. "I don't know," she said, forcing another laugh. "It's been a long day, and I don't really want coffee this late." "Oh, come on," I said, stepping closer. "You go there every morning. What's one more visit?" She hesitated. I could feel her pulse from across the room. I let the silence stretch, let her feel it, let her squirm. And then, before she could come up with another excuse, I turned toward the door, grabbing my keys. "If you don't want coffee," I said over my shoulder, "then maybe I'll just go on my own." That did it. Her head snapped up. "Wait," she blurted out. I stopped, turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. She was scrambling now, her mind working overtime. "I mean, why? I already told you. It's nothing special." I smirked. "Then why are you so nervous?" She froze. There was the moment she knew. The moment she realized I knew. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. No more excuses. No more carefully constructed lies. I let that silence hang between us, watching as the cracks spread across her carefully built facade. And then I spoke. Softly, coldly. "I've seen you." She flinched. 3 little words, and it was over. She tried to deny it at first. Try to play dumb. Try to laugh it off. Pretend she had no idea what I was talking about. But I didn't let her. I listed every detail. The kisses at the counter. The way she touched him, soft and familiar. The way she slipped around back like she belonged there. And then the final nail in the coffin. "The other day," I said, tilting my head, "you told him it was getting harder to lie to me." Her breath caught. I nodded, watching the blood drain from her face. "Yeah," I said. "I heard that too." She opened her mouth, probably to say something, to weave one last desperate story, but I didn't care. I was done listening. "Pack a bag," I said, stepping back. "You're leaving tonight." She blinked, like she hadn't processed the words. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice flat. "Pack your shit. Get out." She stammered. We should talk about this." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, now you want to talk?" I shook my head. "No. You had plenty of chances to talk. Instead, you chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose him." Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't like that." I scoffed. "Then what was it like?" She swallowed hard, scrambling for an answer, for something that would make this not her fault. But there was nothing left for her to say. She knew it. I knew it. And so, for the first time since this entire mess started, she listened. She went upstairs, packed a bag, and I stood there, listening to the sound of drawers opening, of zippers closing, of a life unraveling. She came down minutes later, her face pale, her breath shaky. I held the door open for her. She hesitated one last time. "Is this really what you want?" I stared at her, and then I said the last thing she'd ever hear from me. "It's what you chose." She stepped outside, and I shut the door behind her. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed through the house, louder than it should have been. Final. Absolute. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the wood grain, my hand still resting on the knob. She was gone. Not forever. Not yet. but gone enough that the air in the house already felt different. Lighter, like something heavy had been lifted, like the weight of every lie she'd told had walked out the door with her. But it wasn't relief I felt. Not yet, because as much as I wanted to tell myself that this was over, that I'd won, I knew it wasn't that simple. Cheating wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just broken trust. It was contamination. It seeped into everything, infected every memory, rewrote the past into something ugly and false. And now, I had to live in the wreckage. I turned away from the door and walked into the kitchen, my movements slow, deliberate. My coffee mug was still sitting on the counter from that morning, half empty, cold. I picked it up, swirled the contents, then dumped it into the sink. She always used to make fun of the way I drank my coffee. Too bitter, she'd say, wrinkling her nose. How can you drink that without sugar? Maybe that was the difference between us. She had spent her whole life sweetening things up, covering the bitterness with lies. I had learned to drink things as they were. I leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly, my mind running through everything that had happened in the last few weeks. The first suspicion, the late nights, the kiss at the counter, the way she hesitated when he asked if she'd ever tell me. That was what got me the most. Not the fact that she cheated, though that was enough on its own. No, it was the fact that she had considered leaving me, like I was some old habit she wasn't sure she was ready to break. That hesitation meant she had thought about it. That meant, in some way, she had weighed me against him. And she still kept coming home. Still crawled into our bed. Still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Like I was just a safety net. Something to fall back on if it didn't work out with him. The realization made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, scrolling to her name in my messages. There were hundreds of texts, conversations, little pieces of a life we had built together. All of it was a joke now. I hovered my thumb over the screen, debating whether to send her one last message. Something to drive home, to remind her that this was permanent, that I wasn't waiting for her to come back, begging for forgiveness. But I didn't text her. I deleted the thread instead. A clean slate. She tried to call me that night. 3 times. I didn't answer. The text started soon after. Can we talk? Please, just listen. You don't understand. I never meant for this to happen. I still love you. That last one almost made me laugh. She still loved me? Was that what she told herself when she was sneaking around, meeting him in the back of that coffee shop? Did she whisper in her head every time she kissed him, tell herself that it wasn't really cheating, not if she still had feelings for me? I put my phone face down on the counter, ignoring the buzzing as another text came through. She could talk all she wanted. I was done listening. The next day, she showed up at the house. I heard the car pull into the driveway, slow and hesitant, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there anymore. She didn't. I watched from the window as she stepped out, wearing the same clothes she had left in last night. She looked exhausted. Good. She walked up to the door and knocked lightly, then again, a little more forceful when I didn't answer right away. I could have ignored her, could have let her stand out there in the cold, stewing in the consequences of her own actions. But no, I wanted her to see. I opened the door slowly, stepping forward so I was standing between her and the house. A barrier. She swallowed hard. Can we talk? I didn't answer. Her eyes searched my face. I need to explain. I let out a breath, tilting my head slightly. Explain. She nodded, shifting on her feet. It didn't mean anything. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Really? It didn't mean anything. She flinched at the sharpness in my tone. That's interesting, I said, crossing my arms. Because it looked like it meant something when you were kissing him. She blinked rapidly, as if she could will away the words, erase them from existence. I was stupid. I made a mistake. I let out a short laugh. A mistake. I shook my head. No. Forgetting to pay a bill is a mistake. Running a red light is a mistake. What you did, that was a choice. She looked down, biting her lip, her breath shaky. I didn't want to hurt you. Bullshit. Her head snapped up. If you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't have done it, I said flatly. You wouldn't have lied to me. You wouldn't have kept sneaking around behind my back. But you did. Over and over. Tears welled up in her eyes. Please. No. She froze. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You don't get to beg. You don't get to cry. You don't get to pretend like you're the victim here. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, the fight draining from her. And for the first time since this whole mess started, she looked small. I should have felt something then. Pity. Satisfaction. But I didn't. I just felt done. I turned, stepping back inside, grabbing something off the entryway table. Her house key. I held it up between us, then let it drop onto the porch at her feet. "Don't come back," I said. Then I shut the door. She didn't knock again. 3 weeks passed. The divorce papers were served. I didn't see her in person again. Just signatures on documents, quiet confirmations through lawyers. I never asked about him. Didn't ask if she was still sneaking into his coffee shop, if she had chosen him now that she had no other choice. I didn't care. She had made her bed, and now she had to sleep in it. As for me, I started waking up earlier, making my own coffee. Black, no sugar, no nonsense. And for the first time in a long time, it tasted just fine.